I stood on the side of the highway with no phone, no money, and the person who left me there was my own son. All because I refused to give him my house. Stood on the side of the highway with no phone, no money, and the person who left me there was my own son. All because I refused to give him my house. I never imagined I'd be sharing something this painful, but I believe people need to hear it. My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, a mother and a widow who spent her life putting family first. I raised my son with love, worked hard, and tried to give him a better life than I had. I trusted him completely. For years, I believed that bond could never be broken. I'm not telling this story out of anger or to seek sympathy. I'm telling it because what happened to me could happen to any parent who loves too deeply and trusts without question. When my son was born, my entire world shifted around him. His father and I didn't have much, but what we did have, we poured into raising him the right way. I worked long hours, sometimes 2 jobs, just to make sure he never felt the weight of our struggles. I remember coming home exhausted, my feet aching, but still sitting by his bed to help with homework or listen to him talk about his day. No matter how tired I was, I never wanted him to feel alone. After my husband passed away, things became even harder. Overnight, I became both mother and father. I learned how to be strong in ways I never expected. There were nights I cried quietly in the kitchen so my son wouldn't hear me. I skipped meals, wore the same coat for years, and postponed my own medical checkups just to make sure he had what he needed. If he needed school supplies, I found a way. If he wanted to play sports, I figured out how to pay the fees. I told myself that sacrifices were part of love. As he grew older, our bond only seemed to deepen. He was the person I trusted most in the world. We talked almost every day. He helped me with groceries, fixed things around the house, and called to check on me when the weather was bad. Friends would tell me how lucky I was to have such a caring son, and I believed them. I was proud of the man he had become, or at least the man I thought he was. The house we lived in wasn't fancy, but it was our home. It held memories of birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings watching television together. After my husband died, that house became my sense of safety. My son knew that. He knew how much it meant to me. I trusted him not just with my belongings, but with my heart. I believed he would protect me the same way I had protected him his entire life. There were moments when he'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, laughing, telling me about his plans, and I'd look at him and think, I did something right. I never worried about my future because I assumed he would always be there. If anyone had told me back then what he would eventually do, I would have laughed. I would have said, not my son. He would never hurt me like that. And that belief is what makes what happened next so hard to understand. That house wasn't just a building to me. It was the last thing my husband and I built together. Every wall held a memory. His laughter in the hallway, our quiet mornings in the kitchen, the spot where he used to sit and read the newspaper. After he passed, the house became more than a home. It was my safety, my stability, and the one thing that made me feel secure about growing older. I didn't have a large retirement fund or expensive investments. That house was my future. At first, my son never spoke about it directly. The conversation started casually, almost harmlessly. One afternoon, over coffee, he mentioned how complicated things can become later on if paperwork isn't handled early. He said he'd been reading about estate planning and how families sometimes lose property because they wait too long. His tone was calm, helpful even. I remember thinking he was just being responsible. A few weeks later, he brought it up again. This time, he said it might be easier if the house was put in his name on paper only. He assured me nothing would really change. I could live there as long as I wanted. It's just paperwork, Mom, he said, smiling. This way we avoid taxes and problems later. I didn't feel threatened, just confused. I trusted him, so I didn't question his intentions. But slowly, the conversations became more frequent. What once felt like a suggestion started to sound like a plan he had already made. He'd remind me how expensive nursing homes were, how unpredictable life could be, and how I'd be taken care of if everything was arranged early. Sometimes he'd say it jokingly, other times with a seriousness that made me uneasy. Still, I pushed that feeling aside. After all, this was my son. Then, the pressure grew. He started showing irritation when I hesitated, if I asked questions. He'd sigh, or tell me I was overthinking things. He made it seem like my reluctance was a problem, like I was being difficult or ungrateful. "I'm only trying to help you," he'd say. Those words stuck with me because they made me doubt myself. /P. I began to notice small changes in his behavior. He became less patient, less warm. Our conversations felt transactional instead of loving. When I mentioned the memories tied to the house, he brushed them off, saying memories weren't bricks and walls. That hurt more than I expected. It was the first time I felt like the house mattered to him more than what it represented to me. Deep down, I started to sense something was wrong. The house was no longer just my home in his eyes. It had become an asset, a solution to his plans. And with every conversation, the warmth between us faded a little more. I didn't realize then that this quiet pressure was only the beginning, and that refusing would come with a cost I never imagined. When the moment finally came, I didn't raise my voice or accuse him of anything. I had spent many sleepless nights thinking about it, weighing my trust against my fear, my love against my need for security. I asked him to sit down with me at the kitchen table, the same place where we had shared countless meals and conversations over the years. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I told him I wasn't ready to transfer the house. I explained that the house was my only real protection as I grew older. I told him I needed to know that no matter what happened, illness, financial trouble, or simply old age, I would always have a roof over my head. I reminded him that the house held my life with his father, and letting go of it felt like losing him all over again. I said I wasn't saying never, just not now. I wanted time and I wanted peace. At first, he didn't say much. He just stared at the table, his jaw tight. The warmth I was used to seeing in his face was gone. When he finally spoke, his tone was flat, almost distant. He said he was disappointed, that he thought I trusted him more than that. Those words cut deeply. I tried to reassure him, telling him that my refusal wasn't about mistrust, but about survival. I needed to protect myself. The conversation didn't turn into a shouting match, but the air between us changed instantly. He stopped meeting my eyes. His responses became short, clipped. When I tried to explain further, he waved his hand as if he'd already made up his mind. I could feel a wall going up, brick by brick. It was like speaking to a stranger who happened to look like my son. In the days that followed, his behavior shifted in ways I couldn't ignore. He stopped calling. When he did come by, he was cold and distant, moving through the house as if it no longer belonged to me. Simple kindnesses disappeared. No more asking if I needed groceries. No more checking in. The silence felt heavy, louder than any argument could have been. I kept telling myself he just needed time. I told myself he was hurt, and that eventually he would understand. But deep down, I felt a growing sense of fear. My calm refusal had triggered something in him I hadn't seen before. Resentment, maybe even anger. I had said no in the gentlest way I knew how, but it was clear that my answer had changed how he saw me. And that realization was almost as painful as what would come next. A few days later, he called me unexpectedly. His voice sounded calm again, almost normal, and for a moment, I felt relieved. He said he wanted to talk, that maybe we both needed some air. "Let's go for a drive," he suggested. "We'll clear our heads." I hesitated, but he was my son, and part of me desperately wanted to believe that this was his way of fixing things. I grabbed my coat and got into the car, hoping this would bring us back to each other. At first, the drive was quiet, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, just heavy. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands tight on the steering wheel. I tried to start a conversation, asking how work was going, mentioning the weather, anything to ease the tension. His answers were short. One word, two at most. The longer we drove, the more uneasy I felt. We left the familiar streets and merged onto the highway. Cars rushed past us, fast and loud. I remember thinking it was an odd choice, but I didn't say anything. Then, without warning, he brought up the house again. His tone was different this time, sharper, impatient. He said I was being selfish, that I was making things difficult for no reason. I tried to stay calm. I told him again that I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just needed security. I reminded him that I was his mother. That's when his voice rose, not yelling, but tight with anger. He said I was choosing a building over him, that after everything he'd done, I still didn't trust him. My heart pounded as I tried to explain myself, my words tumbling over each other. The sound of passing cars filled the space between us. The argument wasn't loud, but it was intense, like something snapping under pressure. Suddenly, he slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder of the highway. I thought maybe he needed to calm down. Maybe we both did. Before I could speak, he put the car in park and turned to me. His face was cold, unfamiliar. No trace of the boy I raised. He said two words that still echo in my mind. Get out. I stared at him. I stood there on the side of the highway, the asphalt cold beneath my shoes, the wind cutting through my coat. Cars rushed past me, horns blaring, tires humming a constant, terrifying rhythm. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My hands shook uncontrollably as I clutched my purse to my chest. The world felt unreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. I kept thinking, this can't be happening. My son would never. My son would never. But the memory of his cold eyes, the words, get out, replayed over and over in my mind like a cruel echo. Fear wrapped itself around me like a living thing. Every car that sped past made my heart leap into my throat. I felt completely exposed. There was no shoulder, no safe place to stand. The occasional truck roared by so close I could feel the gust of wind hit me, and I stumbled back instinctively, my mind screaming that I was utterly vulnerable. For a moment, I considered just sitting down on the pavement and closing my eyes. Maybe it would all end. But then panic took over. I had to survive. I had to get out of there. I tried calling my son on my phone, but it went straight to voicemail. My hands were shaking too much to dial anyone else. My mind raced. Who could I call? Who could help me? My heart ached with disbelief. How could someone I had loved and trusted so deeply abandon me like this? The betrayal wasn't just painful. It was terrifying. The thought of being stranded here overnight, with no one, was almost unbearable. Time passed, though I couldn't tell how long. Cars kept streaking by, headlights cutting through the early evening gloom. I hugged myself tightly, trying to calm down, but the fear didn't subside. Every shadow along the side of the highway made me flinch. I felt tears rolling down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them. Somehow I wanted to feel the pain, to prove to myself that it was real, even if it was unbearable. I felt utterly small, alone, and powerless. The highway, which had once seemed so ordinary, had become a place of terror. After what felt like an eternity, I noticed a car slowing down in the distance. Relief surged through me, mingled with fear. Was this someone who would hurt me, or someone who could save me? The car stopped a few feet away, and a kind-looking man leaned over the passenger window. His voice was gentle but firm. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked. His eyes were filled with concern, not suspicion, and something inside me unclenched. I nodded, though words barely formed in my throat. "My son, he left me here," I managed to say, my voice trembling. The man nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I could put into words. He offered to take me to a nearby gas station where I could call someone and warm up. I hesitated, pride and fear mixing with desperation. But ultimately, I accepted. I climbed into his car, feeling a mixture of shame and relief. The warmth of the seat beneath me, the hum of the engine, even the ordinary sounds of a radio playing softly. They all felt comforting, almost surreal after the cold chaos of the highway. Once at the gas station, I was able to call the local authorities and explain what had happened. The police arrived quickly, asking questions gently, ensuring I was safe. I explained the situation with my son as best I could, my voice breaking as the reality of his betrayal sank in. They listened without judgment and reassured me that I wasn't alone, that I had done the right thing by getting help immediately. After that, a kind woman who worked at the gas station offered me tea and a warm blanket. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look at me differently. She simply handed me comfort when I needed it most. Sitting there, wrapped in the blanket, sipping something warm, I let myself cry fully for the first time. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was grief, heartbreak, and the heavy weight of betrayal. My son, the person I had loved unconditionally, had left me stranded like a stranger on the side of the road. That thought cut deeper than any physical danger ever could. Hours later, I finally got in touch with a friend who came to pick me up. Driving home, I looked out the window at the lights of the highway stretching endlessly behind me. I realized I had survived. But the experience had changed something inside me. The highway had felt endless, like a liminal space between safety and danger, between love and betrayal. Standing alone there had forced me to confront the harsh truth. Love doesn't always protect you, and trust can be broken in the most unimaginable ways. Even now, I remember that highway with a mix of fear and clarity. Every roaring car, every gust of wind, every flicker of passing lights, it's etched into me forever. And while I was shaken, frightened, and hurt, I also learned that strangers can be angels, and help can appear in the darkest moments. Alone on that highway, I had nothing but my vulnerability, but I also had my resilience. And it was that resilience that allowed me to step back into the world even after the kindness of strangers and the police. I finally made it home that evening, though home now felt different. The familiar walls, once a source of comfort, now seemed heavy and silent. I wasn't just returning to a house. I was returning to a reality I had never imagined. For the first time in decades, the place that had been my sanctuary felt unfamiliar. Every corner reminded me of my son's betrayal. The kitchen table where we had shared countless meals, the hallway where he had run as a child, and the living room couch where we had watched late-night movies together. Everything I had built with love suddenly carried the weight of loss and heartbreak. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over in my mind. Questions swirled endlessly. How could he do this to me? Was I wrong to say no? Did I fail him somehow? I felt betrayed, not just as a parent, but as a person who had given everything to nurture, protect, and support. The very person I had trusted more than anyone in the world had treated me like a stranger. The pain of realizing that someone you've loved unconditionally could abandon you in such a cold, calculated way is unlike anything I had experienced before. Sleep came in short bursts, and even then, the dreams were haunted by the memory of the highway, the roar of passing cars, and his expression, so cold, so unfamiliar. The phone didn't ring. Not once that night, not the next morning. I kept checking, hoping for a call, a text, any sign that he realized what he had done. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening. Every vibration of my phone made my heart leap, only to sink again when it wasn't him. That silence confirmed the harsh truth. The trust I had placed in him, the belief that he would never harm me, had been broken completely. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about realizing that my love, my sacrifices, my lifelong devotion meant nothing to him when it came to his own desires. Emotionally, the aftermath was overwhelming. I felt a combination of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I struggled to reconcile the boy I had raised with the man who had left me on the highway. It was as though the person I loved had never existed. I began to understand, painfully, that trust isn't something you can demand. It's earned, maintained, and respected. And once it's broken, it leaves a scar that never fully heals. I felt an emptiness, a void, where the bond between mother and child used to be. Every familiar sound and object in the house reminded me of what had been lost. And I began to grieve not just for what happened, but for the relationship I thought I had, the one I believed was unbreakable. I started to consider my options. I realized that my son's behavior wasn't just emotionally damaging. It was coercive. He had tried to manipulate me into transferring ownership of my house through intimidation and subtle threats. I spoke with a lawyer, explaining what had happened. The advice was clear. I had every right to refuse. The house was mine, and no one could force me to give it up. While the legal process reassured me, it also brought new questions. Could I protect myself in the future? How could I ensure that my independence remained intact? Legal protections helped, but they couldn't heal the emotional wound left by betrayal. Over the next few days, I noticed changes in myself. I became cautious, alert, and protective in ways I hadn't anticipated. I realized that life doesn't guarantee fairness or loyalty, even from those we love the most. I began to focus on the things I could control: my own safety, my independence, and my emotional well-being. I reached out to friends for support, and in doing so, I discovered that vulnerability can attract kindness. Strangers, neighbors, and friends offered help, companionship, and guidance. Their support reminded me that while my son had abandoned me, the world still held people capable of empathy, compassion, and generosity. Emotionally, I came to a hard truth. I couldn't change him, and I couldn't undo what had happened. The betrayal was permanent. But my response didn't have to be. I realized that setting boundaries, saying no, and protecting oneself is not selfish. It's necessary. I would not allow guilt, fear, or manipulation to control my life. I began the slow process of reclaiming my strength, piece by piece. Each day, I reminded myself that my worth was not defined by someone else's greed or betrayal. The highway incident had changed me forever, but it had also taught me resilience, self-respect, and the importance of holding firm even when it hurts. By the end of that week, I had made decisions about my living arrangements and finances to ensure my independence. The house remained mine. I had strengthened my emotional boundaries, and though I still mourned the loss of trust with my son, I also began to understand that betrayal, as painful as it is, can reveal the strength we didn't know we had. That night on the highway had been a nightmare, but it had also been a turning point. A moment when fear, shock, and despair transformed into clarity, resilience, and a renewed commitment to protecting myself and my future. After what happened, I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything: the love, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. The truth I came to is something I wish I had understood much earlier in life. Love does not mean giving away your entire self. Love does not mean surrendering your safety, your security, or your dignity. I had spent decades pouring myself into my son, believing that love alone would protect me from harm. I believed that trust, combined with unconditional affection, would create an unbreakable bond. But what I learned, painfully, is that love without boundaries can be dangerous. Boundaries are not walls meant to push people away. They are fences meant to protect what is yours, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Saying no does not make you cruel. Saying no can be the most loving act toward yourself. I had always believed that saying no to my son would hurt him, that it would create distance between us. But now I know that refusing to be manipulated, refusing to allow your own security to be taken for granted, is not cruelty. It is wisdom. It is self-respect. And it is necessary, especially when someone close to you begins to prioritize their desires over your well-being. Family does not automatically mean ownership. I had thought that because I had given everything, my son would naturally care for me, honor me, and protect me. I believed that shared blood guaranteed loyalty. I was wrong. Family relationships are built on mutual respect, love, and accountability, not entitlement. The moment my son believed the house, rather than the relationship, was what mattered, everything changed. I realized that just because someone is family does not mean they cannot hurt you. Just because you love them does not mean they deserve unlimited access to your life or your resources. Protecting yourself is not selfish. It is survival. For years, I equated selflessness with goodness. I thought that by giving, sacrificing, and trusting fully, I was being virtuous. But there is a line between generosity and self-erasure, between love and self-endangerment. Saying no, enforcing boundaries, insisting on your safety, these are not signs of selfishness. They are signs of strength. They are signs that you value your own life and well-being enough to defend it, even when it is painful to do so. Protecting yourself allows you to continue loving without losing yourself in the process. I also learned the importance of discernment. Love without discernment is blind. Trust without discernment is naive. My son's betrayal was a cool awakening, but it forced me to see people, situations, and even myself more clearly. I had loved him fully, but I had not recognized that intentions could change, that greed or entitlement could cloud judgment, and that relationships, no matter how close, are not guarantees of protection. This realization was bitter, but it was necessary. I understood that no one owes loyalty, and even those closest to us can make choices that break our hearts. The highway incident and its aftermath also taught me about resilience. Even in the darkest, most vulnerable moments, standing alone on the side of the road, shaken to my core, afraid for my life, I survived. I found help in strangers. I found clarity in my grief. I learned that adversity can illuminate strength you didn't know you had. Protecting yourself does not only preserve your safety, it builds your character. It gives you the courage to face betrayal without losing your sense of self. Finally, I realize that boundaries and self-protection are not punishments for others. They are acts of self-preservation and clarity. Saying no to my son did not make him unworthy of love. It simply meant I refused to allow harm into my life. I refused to let fear, guilt, or manipulation dictate my choices. Setting boundaries is an act of courage, and courage is necessary for anyone who hopes to love wisely. Love, after all, should enrich life, not endanger it. And family, no matter how close, should respect those limits if the love is real. As I reflect on everything, I wish other parents and even young people could understand this lesson. Loving someone does not mean surrendering your life to them. Protecting yourself is not selfish. Saying no is not cruel. And family is not a guarantee of loyalty. True love exists alongside respect, boundaries, and discernment. When we love wisely, we honor ourselves while still offering care to others. And that, I have learned, is the most important lesson. I lost my son that day, but I didn't lose myself. Those words echo in my mind constantly, and yet they are not words of bitterness. They are words of truth. Because in the moments of greatest fear, betrayal, and heartbreak, I discovered something about myself that I had never truly understood before. My strength, my worth, and my resilience. My son chose the house over me. He chose greed and entitlement over the relationship we had built for decades. And while the pain of that choice is still with me, it does not define me. I am still here. I am still standing. I am still whole. For years, I had believed that love alone could protect me. I thought that pouring my heart and soul into raising him, the long nights, the sacrifices, the unwavering support, would create a bond that nothing could break. I believed that trust was a guarantee. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. And I learned that unconditional love does not always meet unconditional respect. My son's betrayal was a cruel awakening, but it was also a necessary one. It forced me to confront the truth about relationships, about trust, and about what it really means to protect yourself. The highway, the fear, the silence, they all became symbols of awakening. Standing there, alone, vulnerable, and terrified, I realized that no one, not even those closest to you, can be relied upon to always act with love, fairness, or loyalty. And while this realization is painful, it is also liberating. It taught me that my life, my choices, and my safety are mine to protect. That my love for someone does not obligate me to surrender my well-being. That saying no, refusing to be manipulated, and setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is courage. I want parents watching this to understand something crucial. Loving your children does not mean sacrificing your safety or security. It does not mean allowing yourself to be manipulated, used, or disrespected. Love must coexist with boundaries. Respect must coexist with trust, and trust, while powerful, is not unconditional entitlement. We must teach our children and remind ourselves that family is about mutual care, not ownership. Just because someone is related to you by blood does not mean they are entitled to everything you have worked for, or that their love is guaranteed. In the weeks and months after that day, I reflected deeply on what had happened. I spoke to friends, counselors, and even legal advisors to ensure that my future was secure. I fortified my boundaries, both emotional and practical. I realized that resilience is not built in comfort. It is built in adversity. Surviving the highway incident, standing alone when my trust was shattered, and learning to protect myself. These experiences transformed me. They taught me that self-respect is not optional. It is essential. That self-preservation is not selfish. It is necessary. And that saying no, even to those we love, can be one of the bravest, most life-affirming things we can do. I also learned that betrayal, while devastating, is not the end of your story. It is a turning point, a moment that challenges you to examine your values, your priorities, and your strength. That highway was a dark, terrifying place, but it also became a symbol of survival. It showed me that even when someone you love turns their back on you, there is still hope, still help, still a path forward. Strangers, friends, and even the support of professionals reminded me that the world is larger than the betrayal I experienced. That help can arrive when you least expect it, and that kindness still exists, even in the darkest moments. To parents, especially, I want to say this: love your children, nurture them, and guide them. Teach them the values of respect, gratitude, and empathy. But remember that protecting yourself is not the same as rejecting them. Saying no when it matters is not cruelty, it is wisdom. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it is necessary. We cannot allow the fear of hurting them to strip us of our security, our dignity, or our peace of mind. Life will test you in ways you cannot imagine, and sometimes those tests will come from the very people you love the most. Preparing for that, emotionally and practically, is an act of love, for yourself and for them. The pain of losing the son I knew is profound. The emptiness in our relationship, the absence of trust, the weight of betrayal, these things are real and they are lasting. But I have learned to separate my son's actions from my own worth. I have learned that my value is not measured by someone else's greed or entitlement. I have learned that I can grieve what I lost while still honoring who I am. And most importantly, I have learned that even when family fails you, life goes on, and you can reclaim your power, your safety, and your peace. So if you are a parent watching this, hear me clearly. Learn from my mistake. Love fiercely, yes. Sacrifice when it is necessary, yes. Trust deeply, yes. But never, ever surrender your safety, your security, or your dignity. Teach your children that love is reciprocal, that respect is earned, and that family is not ownership. Protect yourself, and know that doing so does not make you unkind. It makes you strong. It makes you wise. It makes you whole. I lost my son that day, But I didn't lose myself. That day, I discovered my courage, my resilience, and my ability to stand firm even when the person I loved most turned away. And while the pain of betrayal will never fully disappear, it is tempered by the knowledge that I survived, that I protected myself, and that I honored my life and my choices. Life will test you. People you love may hurt you, but if you stand firm, protect yourself, and hold on to your values, you will endure. You may lose trust, you may lose comfort, and yes, you may even lose relationships, but you will never lose yourself. And that, above all, is what matters.